This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
The Boston Celtics tonight. Ira Winderman in Boston, getting set for shoot around ahead of that game. And make sure to ask your questions, your comments in the chats. We're going to get to them in the next segment of the show. David, your question about tonight's game, I think it's a good one. We're going to get to that. And please make sure to hit the like button for us. That always does us a big favor, and we appreciate it. Okay, the big story, other than the altercation timeout game, Duncan Robinson demoted. Duncan Robinson taken out of the starting lineup the other night. And it wasn't just Duncan Robinson who was demoted. You had, as you mentioned, Victor Oladipo and Markieff Morris effectively pushed to the bottom or out of that rotation, which could potentially be a signal of what might happen come playoff time. Ira, how big of a deal was this to you? How surprised were you? And do you think this is more than just a one-off?
Well, I think our problem right here is that Eric Spoelstra, usually before he goes to shoot around or before he goes to practice, does check out the Slomin's home security inside the paint show. So I want to make this clear. Clay writes the little icons that come across on the bottom. So it's his choice of the word demoted. I guarantee you, Clay, seriously, if you were to show up and shoot around in about an hour or so and ask Eric Spoelstra using your phrasing about
the word demoted.
I'd like to ask you about Duncan's demotion. Oh my God. I'm like, I'd be doing like my Michael Jackson moonwalk and walking back out of there, because I am sure he would vigorously tell you, based on what he told us post-game also, he needed to reconfigure. He needed to get different combinations. He needed to get Duncan out there to open the floor for Jimmy when he comes back in and for Tyler Hero, and that this was about spacing. So I would say Duncan Robinson has been reconfigured. I agree with you, Clay. I was very curious when Max Strus started, and I talked to Anthony Chang at the Herald about this courtside, would Duncan play in that game? That would have been a demotion. That was not the case. I do agree with your second take here that Victor Oladipo and Markieff Morris clearly were demoted because they didn't play. They were demoted out of the rotation. So my question tonight is, and I think this will be interesting here in Boston against the Celtics, we know the starting lineup, at least based on what happened Monday. You're looking at Bam Adebayo, PJ Tucker, Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, and Kyle Lowry. We know now that the first two off the bench, as we thought they would be all along, were going to be Tyler Hero as sixth man, followed by Dwayne Dedmon. Then on the game Monday, we saw Gabe Vincent, who helped again, and we saw Duncan Robinson. So Clay, knowing, and I think we all accept that Eric Spoelstra is a 9-man rotation coach, you would agree with that, correct?
Yes.
That he's shown all year 9's the number. Caleb Martin should be back today. This is when it gets interesting to me for Duncan Robinson. So with Caleb Martin back, does he play ahead of Duncan Robinson? When that second wave of substitution comes in and they announce now entering for the Heat, Tyler Hero, now entering for the Heat, Duncan Robinson, now entering for the Heat, I'll be curious. Because now you have 3 divided by 2. You have Duncan Robinson, you have Gabe Vincent, who helps, and you have Caleb Martin. Tonight might be a better night where all of a sudden the cry on there of Duncan Robinson demoted might ring true. It didn't on Monday. I'm curious about that. To me, the shock waves right now are the Oladipo and Markieff Morris. And if they don't play again tonight, and if they don't play again in Chicago on Saturday, then you'd have to say to yourself, hey, you fought the damn good fight rehabbing, guys, but the train is left. Tonight, to me, is Duncan Robinson night. I'm curious, Clay. So the Heat, let's just say typical game. They go through their cycle, and Tyler Hero comes in first, possibly say for Jimmy Butler because they're cycling him back in quicker. Then Dwayne Dedmon comes in for Bam Adebayo. When Max Strus checks out the first time, let's say that's the third substitution, who do you expect to be that sub in for Max Strus?
I mean, assuming Caleb Martin is healthy, I think it depends on who's on the floor for Boston, by the way, because I think you don't want to have a situation where you're bringing in Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero, and it's really easy for Boston to find a way to ISO Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum on one of those guys on any given possession, or one of either one of them. I mean, you're putting yourself in an awkward spot.
Well, I want to see. That's one of the first things. That's one of the first things I texted. I tweeted out and actually blocked someone when I tweeted out when Duncan came in. Can this really work? Can you play extended minutes with the defense of Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson on the court at the same time? And someone tweeted back at me, do you actually watch the games, Ira? And then I blocked him, and we moved on from there. But that was my question also, Clay, is defensively, if you wind up in a situation where you have a team with Tyler Hero-like sixth man quality off the bench, you don't want to put yourself in a pickle. So I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No.
But I think that's a factor, the defensive end also. But
it's enormous. It's enormous. Ira, and to me, that's look. I'll die on this hill. It was a demotion. I'm sorry, and this is yes, that's my opinion. I'll freely admit that.
okay.
But it's
so
one
it's
because
him.
it's me. It's
He
this
said
guy.
it.
This guy. I came up with this. This was me. This word right here. That's me. But we've said all year, Ira. Look, the starting lineup doesn't matter as much. It's who closes, right? And I do still feel that way. And yet, I need to see a game where in the fourth quarter, late in the fourth quarter of a game, where you're playing Duncan Robinson ahead of anybody that it would normally be playing in those five. And I'm not talking about a possession for possession game where you're down by 3 points and you clearly need somebody to shoot a three-pointer, right? I'm talking about, man, when you're going, a guy has to play both offensively and defensively, and you're going to have to choose between Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. You're not going to have both of them on the floor at the end of games. So if Duncan Robinson's not playing at the end and he's not playing at the beginning, then you're running out of places to play. So that's where I'm going to push back on the idea that this wasn't a demotion, because you have somebody who those starting minutes, and you've mentioned the Luke Babbitt role quite a bit, where those starting minutes were really the only minutes in the first quarter, third quarter that he was guaranteed to play. Now, you would have the rotational stuff and he would come back in, but if you can't play him at the beginning and you can't play him at the end, when are you going to play him? So, and let me take this a step further, Ira, to your point about Caleb Martin coming back. You asked me a couple of weeks ago when everybody was healthy, when this team was whole, and we were talking about the potential of moving somebody into that starting lineup if you were going to take Duncan Robinson out. You asked me who it would be. I didn't say Max Strus. My answer was Caleb Martin, and it remains Caleb Martin when he is healthy. And especially when you're talking about matchups and you're getting into the playoffs, and if you take on a team, Max Strus is a step up from Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero defensively. He ain't Caleb Martin defensively. And if you feel like, especially early in games, you need somebody who's a quintessential 3-and-D guy, and look, we know Caleb Martin he's not the three-point shooter that those guys are, but he can, if you leave him alone, hit those shots enough to open up the lane for I want somebody who can guard Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and I'm not pressing the panic button on that possession and like trying to call a defensive timeout, which isn't even allowed, or like trying to take a foul away from the ball to make sure that Tatum or Brown don't get eyes, or Derek White for that matter. I mean,
right.
Those are the types of players that you're having to worry about now. So I'll die on that hill, Ira. I think it's a demotion. I want to see if it's permanent. My sense is that it is. And Duncan's going to have to find the way in each individual game to play his way into getting minutes later on in each game, as opposed to having those pre-set aside minutes early in the first quarter and the third quarter.
And again, Big O was asking me this Monday in our Accurate Pembroke Pines report, is this sort of going to hurt the Heat if they're trying to trade Duncan Robinson and lose that salary in the offseason? And my answer to him then, and I'll answer it the same way now, is you worry about that stuff later.
Right.
This is the moment. Maybe if there wasn't last week in the 4-game losing streak, you could say, okay, we'll try to sort of get the best of both worlds, showcase guys and also go for a championship. They're going to live in the moment. The Wizards benched Davis Bertans, and he still became a valuable component in a trade when Washington went ahead and made their trade with San Antonio. You can still make a move. You can still do something like that. So my thought is this. My thought is right now, I'm sorry, with Dallas, my thought is right now, in the moment, you worry about winning now. If you're hurting feelings, well, guys, get out of your feelings. It's all about a championship. But it really is a fascinating turn of events, because as effusive as I was to a degree here on the Big O show, Eric Spoelstra was nonstop about how Duncan Robinson does things that you, I guess for lack of a word, morons just don't understand. And he kept telling us, and there was spacing and unique offense and everything. And then boom. And how interesting was it when they made that move? Everyone who came through that media room you spoke about in our first segment said, yeah, this helped. This helped the spacing. This made us better. Now it was against the Kings. That's why I want to see.
The De'Aaron Fox-less King. Yeah.
Yes.
For sure.
Is this Eric Spoelstra genius just a matter of it's something that works against the Sacramento Kings, who were shorthanded without Rashawn Holmes, without Domantas Sabonis, without De'Aaron Fox? Or is it something that endures? Because, again, we really haven't even gotten into the upcoming schedule. But this is another hell week for the Heat.
Yep.
The Heat, when they were right in their first hell week, exam week, whatever you wanted to call it, and they went and they beat Philadelphia, and they played the game against Chicago, and they beat Chicago, and they beat Brooklyn. They lost by 1 point to Milwaukee. All was good. That worked. They were geniuses. You weren't changing anything. Well, now we'll see the genius of this, because it is Boston tonight. It is Chicago on Saturday. It is Toronto on Sunday. So now we'll see if this works as well, or if when I'm back with you next week after one more game against Charlotte also, you say, wow, Eric Spoelstra really screwed that up. He tried to do too much. I don't know if this works. I thought the players were overly effusive after the game on Monday, considering who the opponent was. Now we'll see if this truly is genius or desperation.
And Ira, you've been in this long enough, and the more I'm in this, I tend to grasp this idea that there is so much that we don't get. There is so much that we don't understand. We're not in their meetings. We're not watching film in a way that they watch film and break it down. We don't know. Football, for example. Pro Football Focus trying to break down whether an offensive lineman does something right is just the most absurd thing in the world, because they don't know what's it. They have no way of knowing. We don't know. What I do know is that actions speak a lot louder than words. And so when Eric Spoelstra comes in and he's telling us this, that Duncan Robinson opens the floor in a way that you can't understand, and blah, I am perfectly willing to accept that. And that's why you and I are perfectly willing to come out here and say, look, we don't see this change happening because of what Spo has told us. There are certain things about that offense, and the actions follow the words. Well, now look where the actions are. And that means a lot to me. And obviously it was just one game for now. We'll see if they do the same thing tonight. We'll see if this is a permanent thing as we get to the regular season, as the rest of the regular season rolls on, and then also as the playoffs come up on us. But actions speak a lot louder than words, and I thought it was enormous. Dola asked this question, and it takes us directly into our next topic. On the rebound, we can talk about everything that's gone wrong for the Miami Heat. We can talk about, in particular, these last 4 games. We can talk about how the offense looks disjointed. We could talk about a lot of stuff. I got to give Cooper Moorhead from Heat.com a ton of credit. He pointed out something that was fascinating to me. He said, look, we can talk about the shooting. We can talk about all this. The big difference between the Heat's offense in the first half of the season versus the second half of the season, shooting is pretty similar. Pre-All-Star break, the Miami Heat's offensive rebounding percentage, 29.5%, 5th in the league. Post-All-Star break, the Miami Heat's offensive rebounding percentage, 22.3%, 30th in the league. They dropped from 5th to 30th in offensive rebounding percentage. And the defensive rebounding hadn't been much better over the last week. You took on a Philadelphia 76ers team last week that was the worst offensive rebounding team in the entire NBA. They out-rebounded you on the offensive glass 11-4. You got out-rebounded in that game 45-34. You got out-rebounded against Golden State 45-34. You took on the Knicks, offensive rebounding 17-8. You took on Brooklyn, offensive rebounding 11-6. The Heat aren't getting these extra possessions. So, Ira, how do you fix that? And what Cooper said, which was interesting, is that the 2 guys whose numbers have gone down the most, Bam Adebayo and Dwayne Dedmon. Now, with Dedmon, the playing time's been a little more spotty, so you can kind of understand that. With Bam, I almost feel like it's because they've been relying on him a bit more offensively to be a bit more aggressive. So I'm throwing all this out there because I want to know how you fix this, because rebounding is clearly a problem with this team. Is it a fatal flaw? How do you fix it as you get to the games that really matter in this season?
I would say energy, energy, energy. And there's one guy in particular, I know we always hate when we put each other on the spot, but I'm going to do it. The quintessential view of a Heat player flying in for an offensive rebound and doing something dramatic is who?
Caleb Martin.
Okay, boom. I'm glad we didn't have to script this out. It's Caleb Martin. Caleb Martin has been dealing recently with an Achilles, with a hyperextended knee, and now he came back and he had the calf contusion. If Caleb Martin, one, is not going to be on the floor or not be healthy, you lose that dynamic thing that you saw Philadelphia and the Knicks and their dynamic athletes do. You need Caleb Martin. Again, that goes back to our previous
let me cut you off real quick, because I think you're hitting on something really interesting here, because I think the fans' point of view on this, and you get it a lot, Ira, is we don't have enough size. We don't have enough size. We need to play bigger. We need to go bigger. You need to play Dwayne Dedmon a lot more with Bam Adebayo. That's how you fix the rebounding problem. That doesn't seem to be what you're saying. So
Energy.
Take that point a step further.
Energy. To me, it's all about energy, especially offensive rebounds, about energy. So he's a number one energy player, Caleb Martin. He tops the energy. This week's Heat energy ratings are led by Caleb Martin. Number two guy, I think, is Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
When Jimmy is angry and aggressive and mixing it up, he becomes a factor. But what have we seen with Jimmy Butler on the injury report recently? The sore toe, the bad ankle that forced him to miss the game. He's not himself. What the Heat need is they're not going to grow. And people, I know what you're going to say. I can imagine what's on the chat right now. Omer Yurtseven is not coming to the rescue. He's simply not a playoff-ready player right now. You need your energy, guys. So I will say this. If Jimmy Butler's not energized, if Caleb Martin can't be energized, you lose that. That's how the Heat made up the difference. They made up the difference early in the season with their energy. Their energy has been lacking. You know what? Energy lacks around game 70, 75, game 80. We'll see if they can resurrect that. That's why Eric Spoelstra's had this push-pull. Do I rest people and get them ready for the playoffs? Or do I win the games now I didn't think I would have to win? We're going to see how that plays out now. Caleb Martin's coming back now from the calf bruise. Do you over-push him and all of a sudden lose him in the playoffs? Or do you say we have to have that energy? The Heat will make up for their rebounding deficiencies with energy. They can't stretch their players. They're not going to play Omer Yurtseven. So I think that's what it has to be, Clay.
All right, coming up next, we're going to talk about this stretch that's coming up. Is tonight's game the biggest game of the season for the Miami Heat? That and a lot more coming up next right here on Inside the Paint.
This is the Big O Show.